Hello, Mark Chatterton of Charterhouse Chambers, and I'd like to share with you today a tale, if you like, a procedural tale from lockdown civil courts. And it's the case of Stanley versus London Borough of Tower Hamlets, 2020, EWHC 1622 QB. And it involves the setting aside of a regular judgment and how that coincides with the amended practice direction under CPRPD 51ZA, which deals with the court's overall discretion during the COVID crisis and lockdown. Now, Mr. Stanley had some sort of civil claim against the local authority. It really doesn't matter what it was. The local authority had, as they so often do, rather dragged their feet prior to the issue and service of proceedings. So it is reasonable enough that Mr. Stanley instructed his solicitors to commence civil proceedings against them in order to get things moving. Well, the local authority nominated themselves to accept service of proceedings, and on the 25th of March of this year, proceedings were served upon their officers. Now, that was a bit unfortunate really, because on the 23rd of March of this year, the world, if you like, went into lockdown, and hence the offices of the local authority were not occupied, at least not occupied by the normal legal team. So the proceedings went unnoticed. Now, Mr. Stanley's solicitors allowed the appropriate period to pass and applied to enter judgment against the local authority. Well, in the absence of any response at all from the local authority, judgment was, as it inevitably would have been, entered. And of course, as I have said, it was an entirely regular judgment. Well, once the local authority got to know about this, they were of course kind of upset about it, and they made the point, well, you knew it was lockdown, you knew we weren't there, and you took no steps to bring to our attention the fact that you had issued these proceedings and that you were going to enter judgment. There were no emails and no phone calls or anything like that. Of course, the rules don't require there to be emails or telephone calls or anything like that. So as I say, the judgment was a regular, and one would have thought, a sound one. Well, the application to set aside was quite a cross and powerful application. It was common ground that the defendant had a tribal defence. We don't need to go into that, but there was a tribal issue. And it seemed to be common ground that the defendants had no one in the office and nobody to review the documentation as it came in. The application accused the claimant's solicitor of sharp practice. Well, the judge, possibly a tad sympathetically, did not make a finding that the claimant's solicitor had unscrupulously taken advantage of the situation. He necessarily applied the Denton criteria to the application, and took account really of the COVID situation to say, well, in the light of the amended practice direction, really it would be entirely unfair to allow the judgment, regular judgment though it was, to stand. And the interests of justice required the judgment to be set aside. It would be apparently unconscionable for the claimant to benefit from the unprecedented health emergency which prevailed at the end of March. Hence, the judgment was set aside. And although the claimant's solicitor was not criticised in terms of his conduct, and this you might think is unusual for a regular judgment, he was criticised in terms of costs, because the claimants paid the entirety of the defendant's costs for the application to set aside a regular judgment. So, what can we learn from this? Certainly within the COVID emergency, play nicely, grant each other extensions, don't take points which the courts are likely to see as unjustified or silly points. I rather suspect that this particular solicitor has got off quite lightly, and that anyone taking that sort of point in the future will not get off so lightly at all. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that the world has changed, but it's a temporary change. And once the emergency is over, we will get back to the norms, if you like, of civil procedure, where regular judgments are actually pretty easy to defend.